If no one will defend him, I will!
I will defend him! The words hit the courtroom like a gunshot. The judge's gavel froze midair. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. The entire room turned to stare, stunned into silence. She was standing, barely 5'6", wearing a diner uniform, her apron still dusted with powdered sugar and coffee stains. Her name wasn't on any legal record. She wasn't an attorney. She wasn't part of the trial. She wasn't supposed to be there. But Savannah Hart didn't care. I said, I will defend him, she repeated, louder now, her voice trembling but bold. Because if this system won't stand for justice, I will. And in that moment, everything changed. Across the courtroom, billionaire tech CEO Keenan Voss sat frozen, abandoned by his legal team just minutes before opening arguments. He was the only black executive in the room, and possibly the most hated man in Georgia that week. The media had already made up their minds. Headlines called him a thief. Corporate rivals wanted him buried. And now, in front of national cameras, the man was left completely alone. Until Savannah stood up. She wasn't a lawyer, she was a waitress. A young black woman from a small town with no law degree and no powerful allies. Just a voice, and the courage to use it. This isn't fiction. This is a black story about what happens when one voice won't be quiet. A story about race, identity, and respect. About a billionaire's last line of defense against a broken system that was ready to crush him. You're watching Hidden Worth, the channel that tells stories about people who are ignored, underestimated, and unstoppable. This is your answer if you've ever wondered if regular people can still make the world a better place. If you care about stories like these, please like the video. Stay with us because what happens next will leave you speechless. This isn't just a test. This is a battle between power and truth. In between what we think and what really is. Between a system that was never built for people like Savannah and the woman brave enough to challenge it anyway. And she did it in front of the entire country, with nothing but her voice and a deep, burning sense of justice. You're about to hear what really happened. Not the headlines, not the courtroom gossip, the truth. Let's go back to where it all began. Before the courtroom, before the chaos. To a quiet diner in Macon, Georgia, where Savannah Hart was just trying to survive one more day, and had no idea she was about to walk into history. Before she was the voice that stopped a courtroom, Savannah Hart was just another face in a crowd people didn't bother to see. She lived in a small rental duplex on the east side of Macon, Georgia, where the sidewalks cracked and the streetlights flickered half the night. Every morning, before the sun rose, she brewed cheap coffee in a second-hand pot, pulled her curls into a loose bun, and slipped into the same uniform she'd worn for 3 years straight. Black non-slip shoes, faded khaki pants, and a white button-down shirt with waffle and sole stitched over the heart. Her shift started at 6 a.m., but she got there by 5:30. Not because she wanted to, but because the early shift meant she could take the bus home in daylight, back before the drunks and creeps came out. She never felt totally safe walking alone at night. Savannah was 26, with big brown eyes that looked like they held secrets. Her smile was warm, wide, and disarming. One of those smiles that made customers believe, for a second, that life wasn't so bad. She knew exactly how they liked their grits, which customers wanted their eggs scrambled hard, and which ones left no tip but demanded a refill before they sat down. She didn't complain. She had bills. Her mom needed medication every month for her arthritis, and Savannah had dreams, expensive ones. She had once been accepted to Georgia State for pre-law, made it through a year and a half, then had to drop out when her father died suddenly of a heart attack. He had no life insurance, just a pair of worn boots and a rusted-out Ford parked out front. No money, no help, no choice. So Savannah worked, and worked some more. Double shifts, weekends, holidays. She even picked up catering gigs on Sundays, passing appetizers at weddings where people called her sweetheart but never looked her in the eye. And the truth? She was used to being invisible, used to being mistaken for a janitor, a cashier, a maid. Once, a customer handed her their car keys in the parking lot, thinking she was valet. When she told him she worked inside, he laughed and said, "Could have fooled me." She didn't fight back, not with words. She stored it, every moment of it, every sideways glance, every time someone made a comment about people like you, every time a job application went unanswered after they saw her name or her photo. Because Savannah knew something they didn't. She wasn't just working tables, she was studying. At night, after her shift, she'd stay up with borrowed textbooks, watching YouTube lectures on civil rights law and criminal defense. She kept a journal full of case studies she broke down in her own words. She knew the difference between hearsay and admissible evidence, how to question a hostile witness, and how to suppress illegally obtained statements. And every time she walked past the courthouse downtown, she whispered to herself, "One day, I'll be in there." Not as a server delivering coffee, but as a defender of truth. Still, some days crushed her harder than others. Like the day an older white woman refused to let Savannah take her order. "I'll wait for someone else," she'd said, with a tight smile that masked nothing. Or the time a man left a Bible tract instead of a tip, scribbled with, "Jesus loves everyone, even sinners." But Savannah never let it break her. Because every shift was paying her something. Her mother's medicine, her internet bill so she could keep studying, her quiet, burning dream of finishing law school, not for prestige, but to fight for people who had no one else. That morning, like so many others, Savannah tied her apron tight, slid on her headphones for the walk to the diner, and pressed play on her favorite podcast, a true crime legal breakdown called The Defense Line. She took mental notes the whole walk there. She had no idea that today would be the last day she'd walk into that diner as just another waitress. Because fate had plans for Savannah Hart. And it all started with a last-minute delivery to the county courthouse. An extra tray of coffee and biscuits for the judge's chambers. A simple delivery, nothing special. At least that's what she thought. Until the courtroom doors opened. And everything she believed about her life, her place in the world, her voice, her worth, was about to be tested in front of the entire state of Georgia. Keenan Voss never wanted to be famous. He was a builder, not a spotlight chaser, a thinker. The kind of man who preferred server rooms over stages, numbers over headlines, and progress over praise. But when you're a black man who builds a billion-dollar tech company from the ground up, people notice, whether you want them to or not. At 39, Keenan was the founder and CEO of NeuroGrid, a rising artificial intelligence company based in Atlanta. He wasn't flashy, he didn't post on social media, he didn't do TED Talks or Forbes interviews. But behind the scenes, his company had developed one of the most advanced diagnostic AIs in the healthcare industry, software capable of detecting early-stage diseases with staggering accuracy, even in underserved communities where access to care was scarce. The idea wasn't to make headlines, the idea was to save lives. And that, apparently, made him a target. 6 months before the trial, Keenan had received a partnership offer from a major medical corporation based in New York, Apex Biotech. They wanted to integrate NeuroGrid's technology into their systems. At first, it seemed promising, big funding, national exposure. But there was a catch. Apex wanted full intellectual ownership, not a license, not a collaboration, full control. They offered Keenan a buyout, 9 figures, enough to walk away forever, but he refused. His reason was simple. If they own it, he told his board, they'll bury it. This tech isn't just about money, it's about people who can't afford traditional care. If we give it to them, we're giving them permission to silence it. 2 weeks later, the lawsuits began. At first, it looked like standard corporate backlash, legal smoke and mirrors. But then it got darker. Apex Biotech accused Keenan of stealing the very algorithm he had built, claimed that Neural Greet's code was developed during a prior contract job he'd taken 10 years ago, ironically, at a small subsidiary Apex had since absorbed. They called it DEFT, intellectual property fraud. Suddenly, the media exploded. Billionaire CEO faces tech scandal. Rising star or master thief. The fall of Keenan Voss. No one mentioned how he'd spent years writing code in his garage, or how he'd maxed out 3 credit cards building prototypes. No one asked why Apex waited a decade to bring up these so-called claims, conveniently after he turned down their offer. Instead, they plastered his face on headlines and treated him like a cautionary tale. Keenan had a legal team, of course, prestigious, expensive, and sharp. At least, that's what he thought. But behind closed doors, the pressure was mounting. Private meetings, backdoor settlements, recommendations to consider negotiation. Keenan began to suspect that his own lawyers weren't fighting for him. They were trying to manage him, keep him quiet, guide him to a deal that would end the case without a full investigation. He refused, and that's when they walked. 2 days before the trial was set to begin, his lead counsel resigned, citing a conflict of interest. The rest followed. No notice, no warning, just a quiet abandonment, leaving Keenan to face one of the most high-profile lawsuits in Georgia with no defense. His back was against the wall. The court wouldn't grant a delay. Apex had pushed for a rapid trial, knowing Keenan's team would need time to reorganize. And now, with the courtroom press already setting up their cameras, Keenan sat at the defendant's table alone, betrayed, targeted, and surrounded by a system that seemed designed to break him. He sat there in silence, staring down at his hands. They weren't the hands of a thief. They were calloused, worn from late nights and early mornings, from typing thousands of lines of code, not signing contracts in marble offices. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters speculated whether he'd show up at all. Others speculated jail time, fines, criminal charges. His silence became a story in itself. His presence was turned into guilt. And then the impossible happened. A voice rang out. "I will defend him." It came not from a legal bench, not from a bailiff, not from an advisor or friend, but from a waitress, a stranger, a woman who hadn't even been scheduled to speak. Her voice cut through the courtroom like a match in a dark tunnel. Everyone turned, and Keenan looked up for the first time in hours. He saw Savannah Hart standing just a few feet away, apron still tied around her waist, eyes burning with something he hadn't seen in weeks. Conviction. And that's when everything changed. It was supposed to be just another delivery. Savannah Hart didn't even want to go that morning. She already finished her shift at Waffle & Soul and was halfway through untangling her apron when her manager called her over. "Judge Harmon's office called," he said, not even looking up from his clipboard. "They need extra coffee and biscuits for some trial across the street. Take the cart. You're the only one left." Savannah sighed, wiped her hands on a towel, and nodded. It wasn't the first time the courthouse ordered breakfast from them, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Most of the time, the staff barely acknowledged her, except to complain about sugar being missing or the coffee being too cold. But today felt off. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the heaviness in the air, or the way the courthouse seemed unusually full for a Thursday morning. Local media vans were parked along the sidewalk, and a crowd had started to gather on the front steps. She pushed the stainless steel catering cart through security, flashed her badge to the familiar guard, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where courtroom 3B was located. That's when she saw him. Keenan Voss, seated alone at the defendant's table, wearing a gray suit that somehow still looked pressed despite everything he was facing. He looked tired, not just physically, but soul-tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your bones when you've been fighting a battle no one believes you can win. There were 6 empty chairs next to him. Savannah didn't need to ask why. She recognized him immediately. Everyone did. His face had been all over the news for weeks, though the photos made him look like a villain. Cold, calculated. But here, in person, Keenan Voss didn't look anything like the man the headlines described. He looked like someone abandoned. A court clerk motioned for Savannah to bring the cart into the break room behind the chamber, but she hesitated, drawn by something she couldn't name. Maybe it was the silence in the room. Maybe it was the way every camera pointed at him like they were waiting to watch a man fall. Or maybe it was the familiarity in his eyes, the same look she'd seen in her own reflection too many times. That look of being judged before you ever said a word. Then the judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff said. Judge Harmon was older, white, and looked like someone who had seen too many cases to care anymore. He glanced over the empty seats at the defense table and cleared his throat. "Mr. Voss, where is your legal team?" Keenan stood slowly. "They resigned, Your Honor." "When?" "2 days ago." "Did you find replacement counsel?" "No." "Then this court will move forward with proceedings in their absence unless—" "I will defend him!" The words left Savannah's mouth before she even realized she was standing. The room froze. The judge looked up, startled. Reporters turned in their seats. Even Keenan blinked, not sure if he'd heard correctly. Savannah felt her hands shaking. Her apron was still on. Her name tag caught the courtroom lights. But her voice didn't waver this time. "I said, I will defend him," she repeated. There was laughter, soft at first, then louder from the back of the room. A couple of attorneys chuckled into their ties. A camera lens zoomed in. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" "Savannah Hart. I'm not a lawyer. I work across the street, but I know this man is being railroaded." "You are not qualified to—" "No, I'm not," she interrupted. "But I've seen what it looks like when a black man walks into a courtroom with no one standing beside him. I've seen the system fail good people. And you believe you can fix that?" "I believe someone has to try." Silence. Keenan watched her, stunned. Not by the words, but by the fact that someone, anyone, was willing to speak them in public. It wasn't legal, it wasn't strategic, it wasn't even smart, but it was human. And for the first time since the lawsuit started, Keenan Voss felt something stir in his chest that had been missing for months. Hope. By the time Savannah Hart returned to the diner later that afternoon, the video had already gone viral. She didn't know it yet. Her phone had died halfway through her shift. No charger, no clue. Just a quiet walk back from the courthouse, apron still wrinkled, sneakers scuffed from running back and forth between tables. But the rest of the world? They had already seen everything. Someone in the courtroom had been filming, probably a journalist, or maybe just someone bored who didn't expect a waitress to speak up in the middle of a trial. The clip was shaky, grainy, but it didn't matter. In the video, Savannah stood upright, eyes locked with the judge. Her voice cracked only once. She didn't back down. And the words she said? "I will defend him, because if this system won't, I will," cut straight to the bone. Twitter lit up first. Hashtag I will defend him. Hashtag Savannah Hart. Hashtag Black Voices Matter. By the time she was pouring sweet tea for a regular customer at table 7, her name had been retweeted over 400,000 times. Clips of the moment were already circulating on TikTok with dramatic music and emotional captions. On Instagram, artists had started sketching her silhouette. Just a woman in an apron, standing tall in a courtroom. The kind of moment that didn't need words. By 6 p.m., the news had picked it up. Local headlines ran it first. Waitress interrupts trial in stunning act of courage. Then came the nationals. Who is Savannah Hart, the unexpected hero of the Voss trial? Black woman steps up when legal system steps out. Talk shows began rolling the clip. One host called her the modern-day Rosa Parks of the courtroom. Another compared her to the janitor in the viral case from 2 years prior, saying, "It seems like justice keeps showing up in uniforms, not suits." Back at the diner, Savannah was still wiping down cables, clueless, until her coworker Lisa came running from the back with wide eyes and her phone open. "Girl, you need to sit down," she said, breathless. "You're on TV." "What?" Savannah laughed, brushing her hair back. "Is this a prank?" Lisa spun the phone around, and there she was, frozen on screen, standing in that courtroom, her name spelled out in big white letters at the bottom, and behind her, the man she had tried to defend, Keenan Voss, staring at her like she'd just flipped the whole world upside down. Savannah's knees buckled slightly. She sat down in the booth she'd just cleaned, hands gripping the edge of the table. "No," she whispered, "no way." But there was no denying it. Her name, her face, her voice, all of it was out there now. And people weren't just watching, they were reacting. Comments flooded in by the thousands. "That woman is a hero. I've never felt more seen in my life." She said what we've all wanted to scream. But not every comment was kind. Some called her unprofessional. Others accused her of playing the race card. A few even posted her old photos, trying to find anything to discredit her. It didn't take long for reporters to show up at the diner, cameras in hand, mics pointed at her like weapons. "How does it feel to be a national figure overnight? Did you plan this? Are you going to law school?" She didn't answer. She just looked at them, tired, stunned, and unsure of what to say. Because the truth was, she hadn't done it for fame, or attention, or headlines. She had done it because it felt right. Because something inside her told her that if she didn't speak up, no one else would. Later that night, after she finally got home and plugged in her phone, she scrolled through the notifications. Hundreds of messages, missed calls, friend requests, job offers, scholarships, and a single voicemail that made her stop breathing. It was from Keenan Voss. He didn't say much, just a simple message. "Savannah, thank you. I don't know who you are, but you saw me, and I don't know what's going to happen next, but you gave me a reason to keep showing up." She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, phone pressed to her chest. Somehow, in less than 12 hours, everything had changed. And somewhere, deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the beginning. Savannah Hart had stirred something dangerous. By the next morning, the media storm was out of control. Savannah's story was everywhere. Every network had it. Opinion pieces flooded in. Some hailed her as the voice of the voiceless. Others claimed she was reckless and unqualified. But while the world debated her moment in the spotlight, something far more calculated was happening behind closed doors. They were digging into her past. Keenan Voss's enemies had been caught off guard by the Waitress's outburst, and now they were scrambling. Apex Biotech, the billion-dollar conglomerate that had filed the lawsuit, suddenly had a problem on their hands. Not just a CEO refusing to fold, but a viral movement of support behind him. They needed to discredit her, fast. So they went digging. First, they found her high school record. A few late grades, a school fight she wasn't even involved in but had been written up for anyway. Then they found an old social media account she hadn't used in years. One blurry photo from a college party, a caption taken out of context. They sent it all to their favorite media outlets. And like clockwork, the headlines changed. Hero or hoax? Savannah Hart's dark past revealed. From waitress to courtroom, who is she really? They even found a mugshot from a trespassing charge when she was 19. Savannah had been standing outside a university protest rally, supporting a classmate who'd been expelled for racial profiling claims. Police arrested the entire group. Charges were dropped a week later, but the photo remained. Now it was front and center on every news channel. And Savannah? She watched it unfold in real time. Sitting on her couch, phone in hand, heart sinking deeper with every headline. "I knew they'd come for me," she whispered. Keenan called her that night. His voice was calm, but she could tell he was holding back anger. "I'm sorry, Savannah," he said. "They've done it to me too. This is what they do when they're scared." "But I'm not the one on trial," she replied. "They'll make you the trial," Keenan said. "That's how power works. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. If they can make people question your worth, they'll distract them from the truth." Savannah stared at her phone long after the call ended. She wasn't ashamed of her past. She was proud of how far she'd come. But now the world was watching her through a lens of judgment, piecing together parts of her life into a story she didn't recognize. And it wasn't just about her anymore. The smear campaign wasn't personal, it was strategic. Because what Savannah had done, standing up in that courtroom, interrupting the machine, had inspired people. Too many people. And that made her dangerous. Keenan knew this better than anyone. 15 years earlier, before Neurogrid ever existed, he had been in a similar place. At 24, he was a coding prodigy. Sharp, quiet, focused. He worked for a government contractor through a third-party firm. Low pay, long hours, high stakes. He discovered something, a data leak. Unsecured patient records being transferred illegally across state lines. He brought it up to his manager, quietly, respectfully. 2 weeks later, he was fired. 3 months after that, the company claimed ownership of a software prototype he had built on his own time. He couldn't afford a legal fight back then. No savings, no lawyer. So he let it go, started over, and kept his mouth shut. But he never forgot. Now, a decade and a half later, the same company, rebranded, renamed, absorbed by Apex Biotech, was back, trying to take what he had built again. Only this time, they weren't going after him alone. They were going after anyone who stood with him. That included Savannah. And Savannah, she was done being silent. "They want to talk about my past?" she told a local news anchor during a live interview. "Fine, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how I worked 3 jobs to take care of my mom. Let's talk about how I went to college with borrowed textbooks and dreams I had to put on hold. Let's talk about how I showed up every day for a job that treated me like I didn't matter, and how I still smiled anyway." She leaned forward into the camera. Her voice didn't shake this time. "You want to know who I am? I'm the girl who didn't stop learning, who didn't stop caring. And when I saw someone being crushed by a system built to silence him, I stood up. That's not a scandal, that's a legacy." The clip hit social media before the interview even ended. Savannah Hart wasn't just defending Keenan anymore. She was defending herself, and the world was listening. Savannah used to believe justice was blind. Back when she was a kid watching courtroom shows with her grandmother, she thought the system worked. The judge would listen, the lawyers would argue, and in the end, the truth would win. But now she knew better. After stepping into that courtroom, even for just a moment, she had seen how the legal system really worked. And it wasn't built for people like her. Not for black women in aprons, not for self-made CEOs with dark skin and a spine, not for anyone without money, power, or connections. The law was meant to be fair. Goal, fair. She realized, though, that fairness was a luxury, and in the U.S., it was often only for the rich. The deeper Savannah got involved in Keenan's case, the clearer it became. Documents went missing. Evidence was sealed without explanation. The judge, though he didn't say it outright, treated Keenan like a criminal, not a defendant. No presumption of innocence, no benefit of the doubt. And then there were the lawyers. Apex Biotech had the best money could buy. Their team rolled in with 3 paralegals, 4 assistants, and suits so sharp they could cut glass. They used legal jargon like a weapon. Objections, motions, procedural delays. They weren't just fighting Keenan's case, they were burying it under paperwork. When Savannah sat in the gallery and watched them argue, she felt sick. It wasn't about who was right, it was about who could afford to drag the fight out longer. She started reading at night, studying case law, trial transcripts, legal blogs written by former attorneys. The more she read, the more the system unraveled in her eyes. She learned how corporations often sued smaller rivals just to drain their funds in legal fees. How wealthy defendants avoided trial for years while the poor were pressured into quick plea deals. How racial bias wasn't just a flaw, it was baked into the very foundation of the court system. And Keenan? He was a walking threat to that system. A brilliant black man who built something powerful and refused to sell out. Someone who couldn't be bought, couldn't be silenced, and, most importantly, was waking people up. The legal system didn't fear Keenan's software. It feared his voice. And now that Savannah had amplified that voice, they feared her too. One afternoon, Savannah met with Keenan's old mentor, a retired civil rights attorney named Mr. Ellison. He had gray hair, slow steps, and a library of books in his home that smelled like time itself. "You're not crazy, Savannah," he told her, handing her a copy of Gideon's Trumpet. "The law ain't broken. It was built this way. And changing it, that's a fight most people don't survive." She sat with him for 2 hours, asking questions, taking notes, soaking up every story he shared about courtrooms in Mississippi, judges who ignored evidence, juries stacked with bias, and the long, painful road to justice. "Why do you still believe in it?" she asked him finally. He smiled, slow and tired. "Because sometimes one voice is enough to shake the whole thing loose." That night, Savannah stayed up writing. She wasn't a lawyer, but she had something most of them didn't: heart. And if that heart could be heard, if her truth could be spoken, even without a license or degree, maybe, just maybe, it could force the courtroom to listen. The next morning, she showed up to court again, not to make a scene, not to go viral, but to bear witness. Keenan saw her the moment he walked in. She was sitting in the third row, notebook open, pen in hand. She nodded once. They didn't need to speak, because now they were both fully aware of what they were up against, and they weren't backing down. Savannah Hart never imagined herself stepping into a courtroom for anything more than delivering coffee. But by the end of that week, she was no longer just a witness to the trial. She was part of it. It started with a question. "Savannah," Keenan said one evening, as they sat across from each other in a quiet diner booth near the courthouse, "how far are you willing to go?" She looked at him, her eyes clear, unwavering. "As far as it takes." He nodded once, as if that answer was all he needed to hear. "Then we need help." Keenan had reached out to a legal nonprofit that supported wrongfully accused entrepreneurs, especially people of color. They had offered him research assistance, trial analysis, and most importantly, guidance. But with only a skeleton team available and a tight timeline, Keenan asked if Savannah would be willing to work with them directly, not as a lawyer, but as something more powerful, a voice the jury couldn't ignore. She didn't hesitate. By the next morning, Savannah was in full swing. She sat with volunteers from the nonprofit, combing through public records, examining Apex's financial statements, and highlighting inconsistencies in testimony from the prosecution's expert witnesses. She was quick, focused, fierce. She didn't have much formal training, but she had a lot of instinct. She saw things that other people didn't. She noticed links between contracts and business timelines that even the lawyers missed. But it wasn't just her mind that made a difference, it was her being there. Every time Savannah walked into the courthouse now, people noticed. Not because she was famous, not because she had gone viral, but because she showed up every day, notebook in hand, looking like she belonged there, even when the system said she didn't. Reporters still tried to corner her for interviews, but she stayed quiet. She wasn't chasing headlines, she was chasing the truth. On the 5th day of the trial, the moment came. Keenan's new attorney, a sharp young Harvard graduate named Erica Lynn, stood and called Savannah to the stand. There was a murmur across the room. Savannah felt her stomach twist, but she walked to the front of the courtroom without pause. Her steps were steady, her voice calm. "I'm not a lawyer," she began, sitting tall in the witness chair. "I'm not a tech expert, I'm not a millionaire, but I am a person. And I've watched what's happening in this courtroom from the outside, from where most people in this country live." The judge leaned in. The jury sat up straighter. Even the prosecution didn't interrupt. "I've watched Keenan Voss be treated like he's already guilty. I've watched the way the prosecution uses words to confuse and control. And I've watched the system bend itself to protect a corporation that couldn't care less about the people it claims to serve." She paused. And I've seen this before. My uncle did 10 years for a crime he didn't commit. No DNA, no evidence, just a courtroom that didn't believe his story. Her voice didn't shake now. You asked me why I stood up for Keenan. It wasn't about him being famous. It wasn't about making headlines. It was about seeing someone being railroaded and knowing, deep in my bones, that if I didn't speak up, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. She looked directly at the jury. Truth doesn't need a title to be true, and justice doesn't belong only to the people who can afford it. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge didn't speak. Savannah stepped down, returned to her seat, and opened her notebook as if she had just given a weather report instead of shaking the walls of a federal trial. After court adjourned that day, Keenan caught up to her outside. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She looked at him, smiled, and said, "Yes, I did." Because in that moment, Savannah Hart was no longer just defending Keenan Voss. She was defending herself. She was defending her uncle, her neighbors, the kids she saw grow up without fathers because of courtrooms that never listened. She was defending every person who had ever felt invisible inside a system designed to ignore them. And from that day on, Savannah Hart didn't walk into that courtroom as a waitress. She came in as a warrior. This was the end of everything. 8 days into the trial, things were no longer just tense, they were boiling. The courtroom used to be stiff and formal, but now it was full of life. There were people in every seat in the gallery. Journalists wrote like crazy. Cameras waited outside like wolves. And at the center of it all stood Keenan Voss, accused of stealing proprietary technology worth billions from Apex Biotech, a company that had once tried to buy him out, then tried to bury him. Today was the day the prosecution brought out their star witness, Dr. Meredith Claiborne. She was Apex's lead engineer, Ivy League educated, sharp as a blade. Her testimony was simple. Keenan Voss had accessed internal files through back channels, copied critical code, and rebranded it as his own. She had documents, timestamps, email logs. On the surface, it looked airtight. Until it wasn't. Erica Lynn, Keenan's attorney, let Dr. Claiborne finish. Then she stood, walked to the podium, and calmly said, "Let's talk about your credentials, Dr. Claiborne." The woman nodded. PhD in quantum computing from MIT. "And your employment history?" 10 years at Apex. I've led 5 major research teams." Erica smiled. "Impressive. So you'd say you're detail-oriented?" "Yes." "Good. Then you'll have no problem explaining why the timestamps on the files you submitted as evidence are inconsistent with Apex's own internal backup logs." Claiborne blanked. "Inconsistent how?" she asked. Erica walked over to the clerk, handed her a folder, and then displayed a set of documents on the screen for the jury. "These are the internal server backups from Apex's cloud system, obtained through a subpoena," Erica explained. "According to these logs, the files you claim were stolen didn't exist in their final form until 2 months after Keenan had already filed his own patents." The room shifted. Murmurs swept through the gallery. Claiborne cleared her throat. "That must be a mistake." "Oh, I agree," Erica said. "A deliberate one." Claiborne's lawyer stood up. "Objection, argumentative." "Sustained," the judge said. Erica took a breath. "Withdrawn. Let me rephrase." She walked slowly toward the witness box. "Dr. Claiborne, did you personally create the documents used to accuse my client of intellectual theft?" "Yes." "Did anyone else review them before they were submitted to the court?" "No." "Interesting," Erica said, glancing down at her notes. "Because we've just received forensic analysis showing several of those documents were modified using a tool registered to a completely different user, Greg Stanton, Apex's lead of strategic operations." Claiborne went pale. "And more importantly," Erica continued, "Mr. Stanton resigned from Apex yesterday, without notice, without a forwarding address." The jury leaned in. Savannah, sitting quietly behind Keenan, could feel the shift in the room. The energy changed. The prosecution didn't just look flustered, they looked exposed. Erica turned back to the jury. This entire case rests on the idea that Keenan Voss stole something that didn't belong to him. But what happens when the real theft, the real deception, is happening on the other side of the aisle? She looked at Dr. Claiborne. No further questions. When the prosecution tried to redirect, it fell flat. The damage was done. But that wasn't the climax, because what came next was something no one expected, not even Savannah. Erica called Savannah back to the stand. There was a pause in the room, confused murmurs. She'd already testified. What more could she say? But this time, Erica didn't ask about the case. She asked about the system. "Savannah," she said, "you've been in this courtroom every day. You've watched how this trial has unfolded. What do you think this case is really about?" Savannah looked at Keenan, then at the jury, and she said, "This case is about who gets believed." The room stilled. Because when a black man walks into a courtroom alone, people assume guilt. When a company accuses him, they don't ask questions. And when someone like me stands up for him, they ask if I'm qualified, like the truth needs credentials. She took a breath. This trial is about more than software. It's about fear, power, and the people who've always been expected to sit down and stay quiet, finally saying, "No, not this time." A few jurors nodded. Even the judge didn't stop her. By the time Savannah stepped down, the entire courtroom had changed, because it was no longer about legal briefs and court decorum. It was about courage, truth, and a waitress who reminded everyone what justice was supposed to look like. Telling the truth has a cost. Savannah Hart knew that now more than ever. The night after her second courtroom appearance, she came home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. At first, she thought maybe she had forgotten to lock it. But the moment she stepped inside, her heart sank. The place had been torn apart, drawers pulled out, cushions slashed, her laptop gone. Files she had collected for Keenan's defense, copies of notes, news articles, everything she had printed and highlighted were gone too. Nothing else was taken, not the TV, not her wallet on the counter, just the things that mattered. Savannah called the police. They filed a report, took pictures, promised to look into it. But she already knew what the outcome would be. No suspects, no follow-up, no justice. Later that night, she sat on the floor of her now silent apartment, staring at the blank wall where her inspiration board used to hang. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, a heaviness she hadn't felt in years. The kind of weight that only comes when you realize someone wants you to disappear. Her phone buzzed. It was Keenan. "I heard," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she lied. He didn't press. He knew the kind of silence she was sitting in. He lived in it too. "The truth doesn't just threaten liars," he said after a moment. "It threatens systems." You shook the room, Savannah. "And they're scared." She swallowed hard. "They broke into my home, Keenan." "I know. So what now?" A pause. "Now," he said slowly, "we stop playing defense." That night, Savannah packed a duffel bag and left the apartment. She moved into the guest space at Keenan's secured complex, guarded by ex-military security hired after the first wave of threats against him. The same cameras that tracked every license plate now protected her too. She didn't want it, but she needed it, because it wasn't just the break-in. It was the online harassment, the threatening DMs, the strangers who followed her from the courthouse to the coffee shop. One of them even slipped a note into her apron at work. "Walk away while you still can." Her boss at the diner gave her a week off for safety, but Savannah could see it in his eyes. He didn't want her bringing heat to the restaurant, not now that news trucks were parked outside every day. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She had become a symbol, and symbols make people uncomfortable, even people who used to support her. But through the isolation, something else was growing. Letters started arriving, dozens at first, then hundreds. Some handwritten, others typed. Most were from women, Single mothers, teachers, factory workers, black girls from Mississippi to Detroit who had seen her video and felt seen for the first time in years. Thank you for standing up. You gave me courage. I showed your speech to my daughter. Savannah read everyone. Each envelope reminded her why she couldn't quit, why silence was no longer an option. The truth had a price, but so did giving up. Keenan faced his own cost. Shareholders pulled out, partners ghosted him. 3 venture capital firms quietly withdrew their investment. The news called him unstable, a risk, controversial, all because he chose to fight instead of sell. But he never flinched. Not when reporters shoved microphones in his face, not when Apex's attorneys offered one last settlement behind closed doors, $60 million, no admission of guilt, and a full NDA. He didn't even read the contract. He just slid it back across the table and said, "You can't buy the truth." And when Savannah heard about it later, she smiled, because finally she realized she wasn't the only one who'd been holding the line. They were both paying the price, but they were paying it together.
And in that unity, there was power. It wasn't supposed to be them, a billionaire CEO and a waitress from a diner in Tallahassee. On paper, it made no sense. They came from different worlds, walked different paths, and knew different versions of America. But what brought Keenan Voss and Savannah Hart together wasn't status or success. It was something far deeper and far more dangerous. They both knew what it meant to be underestimated. For Savannah, it started the moment she entered any room. The glances, the assumptions, the way people looked right past her when she wore that navy blue apron with her name tag and smile. She had grown up learning how to be invisible and still make others feel seen. Keenan knew that story too well. Even as a tech prodigy, he had spent years proving himself over and over. First to investors who didn't trust a black founder, then to competitors who assumed he was just a lucky outsider. Every meeting, every pitch, every headline had been a fight. And now, even with billions under his belt, they were still trying to take him down. When Savannah walked into that courtroom and said, "I will defend him," she didn't just disrupt the trial, she shattered the narrative. From that moment on, the world didn't see Keenan as just another rich man accused of wrongdoing. They saw a man who had earned the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought. And they saw the woman brave enough to stand beside him. The alliance grew quietly but powerfully. Every evening after court, Savannah and Keenan met to go over updates, review media chatter, and game out their next moves. Sometimes it was just 15 minutes. Other nights it stretched into the early morning, with coffee mugs half full and the glow of a laptop lighting up the room. They learned how to read each other's silences, how to speak without words. When Savannah brought up an old civil rights case that mirrored their situation, Keenan smiled. "You've been studying." "I've been surviving," she said. But survival had evolved into something else. Their bond wasn't built on pity or admiration. It was built on shared purpose. They had both seen the system fail people like them. Now they were rewriting the rules, one truth at a time. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet park near the courthouse, no cameras, no lawyers, just wind and grass, Savannah stopped mid-step. "You know they'll come after us again, right?" she asked. "I'm counting on it," Keenan said with a smirk. "No, I mean really come for us. Not just legally, personally. They'll dig deeper, try to make us hate each other, or turn the public against us." "I know." Savannah looked at him, eyes searching. "And you're not afraid?" Keenan paused, then said something she'd never forget. "I've already lost everything once. My reputation, my company, my peace. I know what it's like to rebuild from rubble. What they don't understand is, we're not afraid of starting over. We're afraid of staying silent." That was the moment Savannah knew. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. Together, they made a plan. They launched a joint online platform, Truth Tech, a digital hub for transparency in high-profile legal cases, aimed at helping underrepresented defendants gain access to public support, legal resources, and media exposure. The site crashed in the first hour. Too many people were ready. Too many people had stories. And now, thanks to Savannah and Keenan, they had somewhere to go. People began calling them the fire and the engine. Savannah, raw, emotional, unapologetic. Keenan, measured, strategic, quietly relentless. Together, they made sense. Not because they matched, but because they didn't. And when they sat side by side in court, the world watched differently. What started as a defense had turned into a movement. What began as a spontaneous outburst had become the spark that lit a fire in courtrooms, companies, and communities across the country. They were no longer playing defense. They were leading the offense. Not as victim and savior, not as client and advocate, but as allies, equal in resolve and bound by a single belief, that the truth doesn't just deserve to be told, it deserves to be heard. They had been on the ropes long enough. For weeks, Keenan and Savannah had played defense, dodging accusations, pushing back against media smears, and walking through a courtroom that often felt like enemy territory. But something had changed. The tide was turning, and now it was time to strike back. It began with a leak, not to the press, to the people. Late one night, Keenan released a detailed report on the TruthTech platform, an exposé compiled by his legal team, his data engineers, and Savannah herself. It wasn't just a defense against Apex Biotech's accusations. It was a full audit of the company's unethical practices, manipulated data reports, internal emails suggesting strategic sabotage, and whistleblower statements from 3 former Apex employees who had remained silent until now. The file was called Inside Apex. Within hours, it was everywhere. Trending on social media, picked up by independent journalists, shared across every online community that had followed the case from day one. It wasn't just damning, it was explosive. For years, Apex had tried to show that it was a beacon of scientific progress. But the papers showed the truth. They had scared off smaller competitors. They had bought patents just to kill them. And they had built their billion-dollar empire on a business model of silence and fear. The public response was swift. Employees began to resign. Investors pulled funding. Apex's board called an emergency meeting. But Keenan wasn't done. Savannah helped draft an open letter to Congress calling for a formal investigation into corporate interference in the justice system. It was signed by more than 200 small business owners, former defendants, and civil rights advocates within the first 24 hours. Then came the class action suit. Using evidence uncovered during their own trial, Keenan's legal team filed a lawsuit on behalf of 27 other innovators and tech founders, people who had been pressured, threatened, or sabotaged by Apex or its affiliates. The story had shifted. This wasn't about one man being wrongfully accused. It was about a culture of corporate bullying and a system that let it thrive. Media outlets that had once written Keenan off as a disgraced CEO now lined up for interviews. But he didn't accept many. Instead, he and Savannah focused on building something lasting. They turned TruthTech into more than a site. It became a movement. Every day, new stories came in. Emails from engineers who'd lost their jobs after refusing to alter research data. Letters from teachers who had been silenced for speaking out. Even messages from teenagers learning about justice for the first time. "You lit the match," one message read. "Now we're bringing the fire." Still, the attacks didn't stop. Apex fought back with denial, claiming the leaked documents were fabricated, and accusing Keenan of orchestrating a smear campaign. But their credibility had already crumbled. The final blow came from within. An anonymous source, later revealed to be a senior Apex executive, delivered a sealed affidavit to the court. It confirmed that Apex's legal team had knowingly submitted doctored documents during Keenan's case.
The same documents Dr. Meredith Claiborne had sworn under oath were authentic. Within 48 hours, the prosecution dropped their remaining charges. Not because they were feeling generous, but because they had no case left to stand on. And the judge, now facing a courtroom filled with reporters and legal observers, delivered the words everyone had waited for. Mr. Voss, this court finds you not guilty on all counts. Furthermore, the court recommends a formal investigation into Apex Biotech and its legal representatives. The gallery erupted. Savannah didn't cheer. She just closed her notebook and exhaled, long and deep, like she had been holding her breath for months. Outside the courthouse, Keenan found her standing near the press barricade, away from the noise. "We did it," he said. She shook her head. "No, we're just getting started." Because for every Apex, there were 10 more companies hiding behind walls of privilege and power. And now, they knew someone was watching. The counterstrike wasn't just a victory, it was a warning. Justice had found its voice, and it sounded a lot like Savannah Hart. Just when they thought it was over, it wasn't. 3 days after the court victory, Keenan and Savannah were scheduled to appear at a national conference on justice reform in Atlanta. The event, hosted by a coalition of lawmakers and civil rights leaders, was meant to celebrate their win and launch the expansion of truth tech across multiple cities. It was supposed to be a moment of peace. Instead, it nearly became their last. That morning, Savannah stepped out of the hotel lobby first. She wore a navy blue blazer, gold hoop earrings, and a quiet confidence that had grown deeper each week. She was scheduled to speak after Keenan, but they planned to walk in together. As she waited by the curb, a black sedan pulled up, not their usual car. But the driver stepped out and held up a sign, Voss Hart. She hesitated for just a second. Then Keenan came down the steps behind her, scanning the crowd. "New driver?" he asked. Savannah nodded slowly. "Looks like it." The man opened the rear passenger door with a tight smile. No words, just a nod. Keenan's instincts kicked in. He didn't get in. Neither did Savannah. Keenan turned to the driver. "You got ID?" The man blinked. "Sir? ID, company badge, anything." Savannah could feel it now, the silence, the way the man's eyes didn't move like a real driver's would. How he didn't reach for his phone, didn't check the manifest, didn't ask questions. Something was wrong. Suddenly, a voice called from across the street. "Mr. Voss, your ride's waiting around the block." A young woman in a security uniform jogged over, waving her phone, showing the official confirmation code from the car service company they had always used. The man with the sedan didn't wait. He slammed the car door and jumped into the driver's seat, peeling off with tires screeching. Savannah's breath caught in her chest. Keenan grabbed her hand. The moment passed in a blur. Within minutes, police arrived. Hotel security pulled camera footage. The license plate? Fake. The car? Untraceable. And the man behind the wheel? Gone. It wasn't just a scare. It was a message. Even after the case had been won, even after Apex had collapsed and public support surged, someone still wanted them silenced. Savannah couldn't sleep that night. She sat by the hotel window, knees pulled up to her chest, watching the Atlanta skyline flicker in and out of cloud cover. Keenan sat across the room, silent, processing. "Do you think it was Apex?" she finally asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "No, not officially, but someone connected to them, or someone like them. There's always another layer." Savannah stared at him. "So this never ends?" Keenan leaned forward. "No, but that doesn't mean we stop. We just get smarter." She nodded slowly. "I don't want to be afraid for the rest of my life," she whispered. "You won't be," he said. He got up, walked across the room, and handed her something small, a key. She looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "To the new office, in D.C." She blinked. "We're moving?" He smiled. "Expanding. You're not a waitress anymore, Savannah. You're a co-founder." She looked down at the key in her hand. Something about the weight of it felt different,
Heavier. Real. "You're serious?" she asked. As a heart attack. That night, they made a new plan. Savannah would move to D.C. to oversee Truth Tech's legal aid outreach. Keenan would keep building the tech infrastructure from Miami. They'd meet in every city that needed them, and make sure what happened to them never happened to anyone else again. But before she left Atlanta, Savannah stood on that stage and gave the speech she had written 2 weeks earlier. Only this time, she added something new. "Truth is dangerous," she told the crowd, "because it breaks things. It breaks systems. It breaks silence. But the most dangerous thing is not speaking at all, because silence gives power to the people who hide in the dark." She looked out over the room, and she didn't just see faces. She saw allies, people ready to fight. And for the first time since this all began, she felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but certainty. The final dangerous moment had come and gone. They were still standing. And now, they were unstoppable. Victory doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes it doesn't come with a trophy or a confetti shower or a moment frozen in celebration. Sometimes it looks like a deep breath after months of holding it in. Sometimes it's quiet. The morning the final ruling came down, Keenan and Savannah didn't go to court. They were advised not to. The court had scheduled a private session for security reasons, and the judge would read the ruling to a sealed courtroom, then publish it publicly within the hour. At 10:14 a.m., it hit the internet. All remaining civil and criminal charges against Mr. Keenan Voss are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, Atex Biotech is ordered to pay restitution for damages totaling $86.5 million and is under federal investigation for obstruction of justice and corporate conspiracy. In simple terms, it was over, and Keenan had won. Savannah was standing in the lobby of a community center in D.C. when she read the headline on her phone. At first, she just stared at the screen. Then she smiled. Then she laughed, a deep, emotional, heart-bursting kind of laugh she hadn't felt in years. Not because it was funny, but because it was real. The pain, the fear, the nights of doubt, all of it had led to this moment. Keenan called her from Miami not long after. "We did it," he said, almost in disbelief. "No," Savannah corrected him. "You did it. You never backed down." "Neither did you," he said. They didn't need a long conversation. That one exchange said it all. Later that day, Savannah visited a small park near Capitol Hill. She sat on a bench with her laptop and opened the newest update on Truth Tech. Over 40,000 new users had signed up in the past 72 hours. Dozens of pro bono lawyers had joined the network, and more than 100 case submissions had been flagged for review, each one a potential fight waiting to be fought. The work had only just begun. That evening, Savannah walked into the new Truth Tech office. Glass walls, exposed brick, nothing fancy, just real, solid, and full of energy. A group of interns were unpacking boxes. One of them, a young black woman no older than 20, turned to Savannah and smiled wide. "I watched your video when I was still in high school," she said. "That's why I applied." Savannah felt her chest tighten, not from stress, but from pride. "Welcome to the team," she said warmly. In Miami, Keenan held a small gathering with close friends and former staff. No press, no suits, just pizza, music, and the kind of laughter that only happens after surviving something unthinkable. He gave a short toast. To everyone who stood when it was easier to sit. To everyone who spoke when silence felt safer. And to Savannah Hart, who reminded me what courage looks like. The group clapped. Keenan raised his glass. "Here's to the truth, and to fighting for it, even when the world tells you to sit down and shut up." They didn't need applause. They didn't need a parade. They had something stronger. They had peace. They had clarity. They had each other. The verdict may have closed a chapter, but it opened a door. Savannah and Keenan weren't symbols anymore. They were leaders. And with the justice system still broken for too many, they knew their victory wasn't just for them.
It was for every kid who ever got followed around a store, every parent who got pulled over for looking suspicious, every dreamer told they didn't belong. It was a win for the unheard, a win for the underestimated, and most of all, a win for the kind of justice that doesn't just punish, but heals, restores, and protects. Victory wasn't a finish line. It was a beginning. Justice doesn't just live in courtrooms. It lives in choices, in voices that refuse to be silenced, in people who stand up, not because they're the strongest, but because they're the last ones willing to fall. Savannah Hart never planned to be a hero. She didn't go to law school. She didn't grow up dreaming of microphones or legal briefs. She was just a black woman working double shifts, holding her head high through every insult, every sidelong glance, every moment she was told she didn't belong. But in the moment that mattered most, she didn't hesitate.
She stood up. Not because it was safe, not because she had a strategy, but because deep down she knew what too many of us forget. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to look away. Keenan Voss had everything to lose, and nearly did, but he chose to fight back. Not with money, not with backroom deals, but with truth. Together, they rewrote what justice could look like. Not perfect, not polished, but possible. They showed us that justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears an apron, or a hoodie, or a janitor's uniform, or no uniform at all. It comes in the form of the tired, the overlooked, the underestimated. People who've been knocked down so many times that standing back up becomes second nature. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. You don't need power to make a difference. You need purpose. You don't need permission to speak up. You just need to decide that silence is no longer an option. And you don't need a spotlight to shine. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one choice, one voice. Savannah's voice, your voice, ours. So ask yourself, when the moment comes, will you stand? Will you defend someone when no one else will? Because in a world where injustice is loud and bold, we need people who are louder, who are bolder, who are braver. This was more than a trial. It was a reminder that courage can come from the most unexpected places, and that the line between ordinary and extraordinary isn't as wide as we think. It's just one choice away. Thank you for watching this Black Story, brought to you by Hidden Worth. If this story moved you, challenged you, or gave you a reason to believe again, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Because stories like this do more than just entertain. They give you ideas. They remind us of what we should fight for. And most importantly, they remind us that the truth still has a chance, even when the odds are against it. Only if someone is brave enough to do it. Just like Savannah did. The same way Keenan did. Maybe just like you will.